Throughout World War II, there were many men who took up arms and became incredibly feared. This didn't just include dictators and powerful men, but regular civilians who, through influence amongst others, dominated and committed terrible crimes. Mercenaries and traitors were around every corner, and inside of Hungary there was a number of people who collaborated, and this led to their fellow neighbours being sent to concentration camps. The nation became occupied by the Germans eventually, and inside of the country was a huge amount of persecution and suffering inflicted by different people and governments. At the end of the war, some of these men who caused terror and chaos were subjected to a public execution, and one of these was Andras Kun, who was actually a priest. But he wasn't a normal peace-abiding citizen. He was someone who deployed a group of mercenaries to slaughter and kill, all whilst he patrolled the streets, giving out orders, dressed in his priest robes. He was then pole-hanged in front of a huge crowd, and this is the story of his execution. To support, please subscribe. Andras Kun was born in November 1911, and from a young age it was clear he was destined for a career inside of the church. He attended a seminary in Rome, and he then later moved on to train as a priest in a Franciscan monastery. As a young man he was incredibly religiously devoted and peaceful, but then in 1943 he was expelled from the monastery, and he went back to Hungary and moved specifically to Budapest. He throughout his career had given many different masses and preached a huge number of sermons, and he continued to preach inside of Hungary, but he then became politically motivated, or some would say radicalised to the far right. In 1944, he became a full member of the pro-Nazi collaborationist Arrow Cross Party, which was a far-right ultranationalist movement led by Ferenc Szalasi. These were in government for a brief period from October 1944 to March 1945, and whilst in power they sent thousands of people to concentration camps, where they were then slaughtered inside of gas chambers. The Arrow Cross beliefs and policies were similar to those of the Nazis, and they wanted to purge Hungary of specific groups of people. But before the German invasion of Hungary in March 1944, Andras Kun became more politically motivated and took an active role in this. He began to collect weapons and then distribute them to his fellow party members. He claimed that, and I quote, "The propaganda drilled into us is the belief that Jewish people lurk behind the Bolsheviks. Amidst the wildest battles, I stood with this conviction, and as they came before me, I beat them." The Arrow Cross were a puppet government, but they were helped by the Germans, and they overthrew the regent Miklos Herfy. He was forced to abdicate, and the leader of the Arrow Cross, Szalasi, was then made the leader of the nation of Hungary and the prime minister of the government. With this he brought in a ruthless regime, in which slaughter took place on the streets, even though the enemies of the Nazis and Arrow Cross, as in the Soviets, were technically within Hungarian lands and were fighting the Germans. Hurriedly senior Nazis such as Adolf Eichmann convinced those in government to rapidly deport their Jewish populations from Hungarian towns and cities to Auschwitz, where they were then slaughtered in gas chambers. Inside of Hungary, the collaboration between the Arrow Cross and the SS ran deep, and there were also death squads set up who slaughtered civilians. Andras Kun, the priest, became a commander of an Arrow Cross death squad in a Budapest district. He remained even when senior government officials fled, and the death squads he commanded massacred Jewish people and civilians who were in hiding. He was even seen in his priest robes and his cassock, as well as wearing his Roman collar, showing he was a priest. He also wore his Arrow Cross armband and carried a pistol. He then ordered his men, "In Christ's name, fire," as they executed and shot many in cold blood. Kun later claimed that, I quote, "I always wanted to reduce human misery and suffering. That is why I fought against them. They are the lords of capital. They were always the ones to walk on the sunny side of the street." He had a number of high-profile victims too. In January 1945 he ordered the arrest of a well-known author and his family, and Kun then personally tortured his wife and son. When they were taken to the Arrow Cross headquarters, they were stripped, tied together and beaten badly. They were then shot by a firing squad, but somehow the son managed to survive 4 bullets and then somehow get out of Hungary. The slaughter under Kun continued, and on the 12th of January 1945, his forces entered a hospital and executed 100. They also abducted 500 Jewish people, lined them up on the banks of the Danube River, and when Andras Kun gave the order to fire, you can imagine what happened next. Further raids of mental hospitals and facilities took place with even more bloodshed. Budapest was eventually besieged, but Kun did not flee, and he continued to rampage and attack people. The bridges were blown to prevent people escaping, but Kun was helping Nazi war criminals to try and get out, and he continued his rampages. The Arrow Cross government, which still remained, was still fearful, and they became tired of his crimes, and he attacked buildings which were under protection, and on the 18th of January 1945, a police patrol was sent to arrest him, but he then arrested the police detachment, beat up the commanders, and locked them in his basement. This would be a last stand, and Kun was ordered to give himself up, or the building would be attacked, and he did submit. The killer priest was now in custody, and he was taken to court for trial. The National Calling to Account Department, as it was known, charged him with many crimes. Some were rather specific. One of the charges was that, on the 18th of January 1945, Lieutenant Colonel Rezo Mindak was severely beaten and later arrested, and Kun abused a section of police officers in the party house. The priest was accused of being involved in the murders of around 3,000 people, and all of this death was happening whilst the Second World War was still going on. He was initially spared execution by the intervention of Ferenc Szalasi, and he was sentenced to 15 years in prison. But when the Soviets captured Budapest, Andras Kun was released, as they thought he was just a priest. They didn't know what sort of a beast he truly was. For months Kun went on the run and tried to hide out, and he may have left the country, but for some reason he returned to Hungary. He was captured on the Italian side of the border, and was arrested on the 3rd of August 1945, and was then sent back to Budapest to yet again stand trial. This time it would not be so lenient. Andras Kun was brought out in front of the Hungarian People's Tribunal, and was tried for the murder of 500 people. It's believed his forces were responsible for more deaths, but Kun was found guilty of war crimes and crimes against humanity, and also the slaughter and massacre of innocent people throughout World War II. On the day of his execution, he was interviewed and he claimed about his sadism and beastly behaviour he exhibited that the perversion exists in a dormant state in every soul. If it did, then it was dormant in me, and I was not conscious of it. In interviews prior to his execution, he did admit that he beat people and inflicted violence, but tried to maintain that he'd been sentenced to death illegally. Andras Kun, on the 19th of September 1945, was brought to Budapest for his execution. He was to be pole-hanged. This did not use a gallows, but instead a 3-metre vertical pole or post, in which a condemned was strapped to. The executioner and his assistant secured the priest to the pole, and he was then held in place by a leather strap across his middle. Ropes were passed around the top of the pole and the bottom, and they were then secured around his feet. From the top a noose was secured around Kun's neck, and then the executioners checked everything. The point of pole hanging was for the condemned to drop a short distance, and then for the executioner to attempt to snap or dislocate the neck manually. When the executioner was happy, he signalled to his assistant to release a drop, and the executioner, on a step behind the post, placed a hand under the neck of the priest, and with the drop he forced the head to the side. He then placed a white cap over Kun as he slipped away. It's not known how effective the instant execution was, but he did not move too much after the initial drop. After his execution, Andras Kun was cut down, and thousands of people had come to witness his demise and death. For them he had terrorised people when they were very vulnerable and were suffering greatly, and he took advantage of the situation of the Second World War. He was a killer priest, which even for World War II is a rarity, and he ordered groups to massacre and slaughter wherever he went. Thanks for watching. To support our channel, please make sure to subscribe, and once again, thank you so much for watching.